Okay, can everyone hear me? There's a mic, but I'm not going to use it as long as you can hear me. If you can't hear me, shout at me and I'll try and speak up. So I'm giving a talk today on the value of planning and preparation in situations of varying levels of constraint, or how to learn to stop worrying and become an entrepreneur. So don't worry if that makes absolutely no sense to you. Hopefully by the end of the talk it will. The talk slides are available at that URL, tiny.cc, Benzitlau Tech Talk, if you want to follow along or check them out afterwards. So first of all, who am I? So my name's Benzitlau. I graduated from electrical engineering, so I came from a hardware background in 2008 from U of A. And then things happened. You can see there's a bunch of different logos. So I think exactly half of those are my own companies that I've started, and the other half are companies I've worked at in that time. And I'm currently director of engineering at a local startup called Jobber. So Jobber, we do software for field services companies. So companies that go into the field and do work, whether it's landscaping, maid services, that type of stuff. Mobile's a big deal for us. We have mobile apps out there as well, and we're actually just working on a new tech stack for that, which is actually going to be, to tie into the JavaScript talk, basically a one-page JavaScript app running on Ember, which is another JavaScript MVC framework. This is our lovely new website that we actually just launched this week. Our designers did some really good work on that. So just to give you an idea of what the format of this talk is going to be, I'm going to go through some story, I'm going to go through some hand waving, and then we're going to do some science. Okay, so story. People think that stories are shaped by people. In fact, it's the other way around. So growing up. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about a few of those logos that I showed. I'm also going to plug CoOp. So my first job was for what was originally the imaging department of Micron. Micron's a big memory company. They own Lexar. They own Crucial. They make a lot of the memory in the world, both flash and RAM. But the department I was in while I was there spun out into an independent company called Aptina, which actually just got acquired by another company this year. And I couldn't have gotten that job coming out of my undergrad degree without CoOp, absolutely not. Everyone else I worked with had graduate degrees. I thought I was going to need a graduate degree to get to do that kind of work. But they offered me a job coming out of CoOp as well. So if you can do CoOp, do CoOp. If you can't do CoOp, try and get those types of summer jobs. They help a lot when you go get work. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about FireNest, which was my first startup. Okay, so University of Alberta. So engineering school is really important and teaches you very important things like the fact that you are smart, the fact that you are probably smarter than most people, and that you probably know the right answers because you have been well trained and during engineering you've worked really hard, right? Yes? Okay, you're with me so far. Okay, so this is valuable, and this is valuable when you go to do something like work in a very engineering-heavy industry. So I went to work for Micron, like I said, in imaging. So what I worked on was CMOS image sensors, complementary metal oxide semiconductor image sensors, which are basically little chips that replaced film. So they're in your cell phones, they're in your computers, your point-and-shoot cameras. They're the things that actually capture the images. They do things like JPEG compression, auto-white balancing, autofocus, all that kind of stuff. So I got to go work on these chips, and it was really cool. It's a really cool mix of like analog technology and digital technology on those chips. But making those chips is really expensive, like completely ignoring all the manufacturing costs. When you tape out a chip, which basically means like you say like, okay, I'm going to ship my code, you have to make masks, which they use to actually do the photolithography to form the chips. Each one of those masks costs about $1 million to make. A chip will have a number of those, some of them more expensive, some of them less expensive, but our chips cost about $25 million. So if you think about that in terms of software, that's like every time you go to ship code, it costs $25 million. That's expensive. So you don't want to do that very much. You want to make sure that when you ship, there's not going to be a lot of bugs. So because of that, you need to be smart. You need to do a lot of work ahead of time to make sure you're making the right decisions, the right design decisions, that you're testing things well, that you're doing all those aspects. So I went there, I got to work with a lot of smart people, and then I went, okay, I'm smart, but I don't want to keep on doing this slog. I'm working really hard. I'm only getting paid whatever I'm getting paid. But I'm smart, so I can go make more money by doing my own business. So there's another guy who graduated from U of A at the same time as me, Eugene Chen. He runs the technology team at another company in town called Dark Horse Analytics now, which spun out of U of A stuff. At the time, he was working at Microsoft. He worked on some of the kind of like skunkworks prototype stuff inside Microsoft. So we were both smart guys. We had like done successful things, so we knew that business was going to be easy. So we started this business called FireNest. We did collaboration software for nonprofits back in 2009. And basically what it ended up being was a year-long, very expensive lesson that we learned. I think the business in its lifetime probably made about $700 or $800 worth of revenue. And we probably put something like $50,000 of cash in a year of our lives into it. So what went wrong? So there's reference to Lean Startup, which is Eric Ries. He's a big thinker in kind of the startup world now. Also Intuit's very much bought into a lot of Eric Ries' ideas. So you're seeing it in the corporate land as well. Kind of one of the predecessors to Eric Ries is a guy named Steve Blank, and he is the saying which I really like, which is there's no facts inside the building, only assumptions. And this is basically my view of a startup that I've evolved to over time. So a startup is a machine whose primary goal is generating learnings that ultimately result in a business model. The goal of a startup isn't making money. The goal of a startup is making a business model. And in order to do that, you have to learn as efficiently as possible. But the problem was we didn't know how to do that. Basically, because of our backgrounds and what we had learned at school, the way we went about business was sitting in a room debating with each other because we knew we were both smart and we both knew that we were smart enough to know what the right answer was. And a lot of the time, the right answer that we both knew was right happened to be different from each other, so we'd sit in the room and spend times on whiteboards debating it. Okay, so let's get into some hand waving. So basically, we did a lot of homework. We did a lot of preparation. Because we believe that that was how you got the right answers. That was the way in which you made something work. But preparation is not free. Every hour you're sitting there studying or planning or debating could be spent in other ways. It's also prone to diminishing returns. So if you're studying for an exam, if you study for 1 hour, you'll probably do better. If you study for 5 hours, you'll probably do better than that. But at some point, that's going to tail off, and you're going to stop doing better for every hour. It becomes less efficient. It depends on the context, so I'll get into this a lot more, but the value of preparation is not the same in all situations. There's situations where it makes sense, there's situations where it doesn't, and this one is surprising and often culturally difficult to accept, but it's often more efficient to fail your way to success than to plan your way to success, and I'll talk about that a bit more. So let's look at some scenarios. So someone gives you a set of keys, and you're supposed to go, feed their cat or something. The set of keys has like 7 different keys on it. You go to the door. You got to figure out which key to use in the door. What you probably don't do is like start researching different manufacturers of locks and like looking at the different slide patterns on the key to figure out which slide pattern smash the lock. What you probably do is you take keys and you start trying to put them in the hole. And you do that until one of those keys works, right? So what are the characteristics of the situation? The cost of preparation is high. If you wanted to do the advanced work so that you had the knowledge in which to determine which key was the right key ahead of time, that would be a lot of work. The cost of attempts is very low. It costs you almost no time, no energy, no money to just try keys. The cost of failure is almost zero, assuming the lock's not going to explode or something when you try and use it. And the problem space is linear and one-dimensional. A different scenario, so Christmas presents. So Christmas presents have a different characteristic. The cost of preparation is pretty low. If you're buying a Christmas present for your parents, your mom, let's say, if you ask her what she wants for Christmas, she can give you some ideas of what she wants. The value of that research is very high. It helps you zone in on a successful solution to that problem very quickly. The cost of attempts is very high. You only get to try this once a year. I guess you could try and do it more than once a year, but you'd probably just confuse them. And the cost of failure is very high. Giving someone a shitty Christmas present has a high cost of failure in terms of your relationship with that person. And the problem space is very complex and multidimensional. There's all kinds of different presents you could be getting someone in all kinds of different categories. Another scenario, if we're designing CMOS chips, I kind of referred to this already, cost of preparation is high, value of success is high. If you design a better chip than your competitor, that results in a huge amount of business. I could talk about some of the dynamics in the very commoditized semiconductor market that kind of lead to that too. The cost of attempts is very high. The cost of failure is high. If you lose that business, that's a huge amount of revenue you're losing. The problem space is complex. So some ideas to take away from this. Situations have different contexts. They can vary in terms of how much it costs to do something, what the penalty of being wrong is, what the reward of being right is. There's also things like public perception of failure, you know, what your grandparents are going to think when you fail versus when you're successful, which makes you want to not fail. And social acceptance of preparation. Going to study for an engineering degree is a very socially acceptable thing. Trying to do startups 3 times and failing over and over again is less socially acceptable. Less people will pat you on the back for doing that than going to U of A and get an engineering degree. So depending on the context of a given problem space, preparation makes more or less sense. And whenever possible, try and reject the social values on things like failing and studying and those types of things. They can be very misleading, and a lot of the time they're not very useful. Okay, science in quotes, note the quotes. I do not contend that this is valid science, but it's useful for me trying to make this point. I'm going to use some code to do this. I don't think I'll show any code. If you're interested in looking at the code, because a lot of you are developers, you can go to my GitHub, and it's at that URL there, GitHub, Benzitlau, prep versus play. So basically, I wanted to create a model to prove what I'm saying is right, because hand waving is very, debatable, and it can be very misleading. So can what I'm doing here, but there's numbers which give it more validity. So basically, I set up a model. So I set up a game. So in this game, a player can either attempt a problem or they can try and prepare for the problem. There's an arbitrary number of variables, which creates an arbitrary problem space of n dimensions. On each attempt, a player can guess one set of those values for those number of variables. On each time they prepare, it basically constrains the problem space so that they have less of a large space to contend with. So example here would be 2 variables with each with possible 3 sets of values, so a problem space of 9 possible values. And then I set up 2 AIs, Lucy, Larry, and Prudent Pete. So Lucy, Larry is 10 times more likely to attempt something than to try and prepare for it. Prudent Pete is the opposite. And who's going to win? Any guesses?
Lucy, Larry.
Lucy, Larry? Okay, well, of course, it's a trick question because it's going to depend on the scenario. So basically, I went and set up some different problems. So this is the lock and key problem. So there's 1 variable, only 5 possible values. That's the problem space right there. And the cost of attempts is very low, the cost of failure is low, and the first player to succeed wins. These are all parameters I can program into the game to kind of change the state of it. And as we see when we play this game, I played it 1,000 times. I didn't play it, my computer played it. And Larry won 74.5% of the time. So he dominated pretty well in this context. So Lucy, Larry is better at opening the door. But there's a trick here. And the variation that I then ran is something called the locksmith problem. So if you're just taking someone's keys and opening a door 1 time, that's different than, let's say you're a locksmith and you're going to be doing this all the time. So the value of doing the initial research and learning about these keys and learning about these doors provides more value if you're going to be doing that same problem over and over again. So in this case, basically the same problem set, but instead of the first player that was successful, the player who had the most successful openings of a door in 100 turns wins. And in this case, Pete wins. So it's a very similar problem, but the main difference here is whether you're doing something 1 time or many times, and it changes completely which strategy is effective. Okay, Christmas present problem. So more complex space. I used 10 possible values. I only drew 5 because the 10 thing was going to be way too much work to type the numbers. Attempts are limited, cost of failure very high, cost of preparation is cheap, and basically the player got the high score after 100 attempts wins. So again, we see Pete dominated the scenario. Pete, if you're going to get someone in Secret Santa, you want it to be Pete. But there's also a flip side to this one, and it's that if you look at the amount of turns that Pete, so in my model, you spend turns on doing these things, Pete spent way more time doing this. like 6 times as much time as Larry. So if you're, if you have lots of time, then that is going to win every time. But we don't have unlimited time, so that's something to think about as well. So what does this mean? So basically, this is the takeaway that I want to give you guys, because this was a lesson I had to learn very much the hard way and the expensive way coming out of engineering, is that doing your homework and preparing and doing all of those things is not always the right answer. So for any decision or situation that is big enough to warrant even thinking about this, so a lot of cost or a lot of risk, like you're buying a house, changing a career, taking a job, moving to a new city, look at that context. Think about how much does it cost to be wrong? How much am I going to get for being right? How much does it cost to just try? How much is the cost of an attempt? And think through that. And then from there, say, how much homework should I be doing, or should I just be trying? Places and stuff. So you can see like pretty much all my stuff online is under Benzilla. So if you want to see any of my stuff, you want to check out my GitHub or anything like that, you can just look for Benzilla. It's my email address. There's the URL for this talk again. It's my Twitter. There's a website, blah, blah, blah. So you can go to any of those. And yeah, that's basically my talk. And again, like I encourage you guys, if you want, go play around with the code. It's not the most beautiful code I've ever written, but it's kind of fun to mess around with.